We looked before at how a change in price changes quantity supplied. So when we talk about supply, we're talking about the relationship between price and quantity supplied. Quantity supplied is the amount that businesses are willing and able to sell. And so we looked in a previous video about how when the price goes up, ceteris paribus, so we're not changing anything else but price. When the price goes up, what happens to the amount businesses are willing and able to sell? Well, since a higher price, not changing cost, means more profit, it makes business happier, they want to sell more. So as the price goes up, the quantity supplied, the amount that businesses are willing and able to sell, increases, and we get an upward sloping supply curve. So a change in price, and remember we have that delta symbol, the triangle, it means change. A change in price causes a change in quantity supplied. Okay? This is a movement along the supply curve. Now the question is, what would cause us to move the whole supply curve? That is, what would make the business willing to sell more at every price? So you see these dots here are not on the supply curve. This is a new supply curve, a shift to the right, an increase in supply. So what would cause the business want to sell more at every price, to increase supply? Well, there are a number of factors that shift the supply curve, so let's look at those. The first is the cost of your factors of production. So any change in wages, interest, rent, or profits. So let's suppose that wages go down. So we have a decrease in wages. That means the cost to the business is less. Well, if the cost to the business is less, then that means that at the current price, they are now making more profit per unit. And businesses like making profit. So if they're making more profit per unit at the current price, then they're willing to sell more at that price. So when costs go down, supply increases. And an increase in supply is a shift to the right. If cost goes up, so if wages cost more, then it means the business has to pay more to make its goods, which means at the current price, their profit margin is less. They're less happy about selling at that price. And so then, when cost goes up, supply decreases, okay, or shifts to the left. Because as a company, if your costs are going up, you don't want to sell as much at the current price. You'd rather sell more at a higher price. So how do you get a company to keep producing the same quantity if their costs have gone up? Well, they need to be able to charge a higher price. Notice this point is not on the supply curve either. Our supply curve has shifted to the left. So if costs go up, supply shifts to the left. If costs go down, supply shifts to the right. There are other things that change the supply curve. The number of producers or businesses. If you have more competition, more companies are making the same product, then that means at the current price, so if this is the current price, we now have more quantity being produced because not only is your company making it, but another company is making it as well. So an increase in the number of producers would shift the supply curve to the right or increase supply. If there is a change in business taxes, that will also change supply. If taxes go up, then it's costing more to the business, which means supply is going to do what? It's going to decrease or shift to the left. Remember, because at the current price, they don't want to sell as much. To keep selling the same amount, now that it costs more, they want to charge a higher price. Other things that change supply would be changes in technology. Well, why would a business take on new technology? Well, businesses take on new technology to make them more efficient. And what does it mean to be more efficient? It means make more with less. So if the technology makes them more efficient, then they're able to make more with less cost. And we know that when the cost goes down, businesses are making more profit per unit, and now they are willing to sell more, and we have an increase in supply. So technology will increase supply. It's unlikely that you would downgrade your technology, so technology just increases supply. The fifth thing that changes supply is an expectation of future prices. So let's suppose that you manufacture furniture and market conditions are kind of terrible right now because the economy is not doing well. But you're seeing signs that the economy is going to do well in the future, and we're expecting that prices for goods will be higher in a month or two. Well, what could you do? If you expect future prices to be higher, when would you rather sell your product? Now at the current price, or 2 months from now at the higher price? Well, we'd rather sell for a higher price, right? Remember, nothing else is changing. Ceteris paribus. Costs haven't changed. We're just selling now or later, later being a higher price. We'd rather sell at a higher price, so we want to wait. Well, if we expect prices to go up, and we make a particular good that we can hold on to, so furniture doesn't go bad, then that means at the current price, the amount that we're releasing out into the market that we're selling, we're going to do less. Okay, so notice that point is not on the supply curve. We're going to decrease the current supply in the market by holding on to our goods. That means that at the current price, the amount the customers want is more than what's available, and it's going to actually drive up the price. So if we expect prices to rise, so we hang on to our goods and not sell them, then that actually creates a shortage that drives up the price. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy here. Now, if you have a product that goes bad, so maybe you sell eggs, then you can't just hang on to the eggs from this month and sell them 2 months later, right? They go bad. So if you can't stockpile, which is what we just looked at here, what you might do is ramp up production. In that case, you're preparing for those higher prices in the future by getting more chickens so that you can have more eggs in the future. Well, as you get more and more chickens, what that means is that at the current price of eggs, you are now producing more and more eggs in anticipation of that higher future price. So that means you're selling more eggs over time as you accumulate more chickens at the current price. Notice that point is not on the supply curve. We've created a new supply curve. We've shifted to the right. Well, what this means now is we've flooded the market with eggs in anticipation of that higher price in the future. But that increase in supply means that the quantity supplied of eggs is more than the quantity demanded of eggs, and that puts downward pressure on the price, causing it to fall. So if we can stockpile in anticipation of higher prices, we'll actually push the prices up. If we're ramping up production in anticipation of higher prices, we'll actually negate those higher prices by putting downward pressure on the price. So we've looked at changes in supply. Costs change, number of companies selling the product, business taxes, which of course also change the cost of the business, changes in technology, making you more efficient, expectations of the future, and the last one is the price of substitutes in production and complements in production. So here we're looking at the price of related goods. So let's create for ourselves a new page here. And let's look let's look at the price of substitutes in production. So notice that there's this in production here, and that's to distinguish the fact that these are substitutes in the mind of the business as opposed to substitutes in the mind of the customer. So if they're substitutes in the mind of the business, then when the business is deciding what to make, they could make either product. They use the same land, labor, capital. So let's assume that we have two goods. And let's assume that we have a field and that we can use the same amount of water and the same soil to make either product. And let's just call them lettuce and tomato. Those of you who are actually involved in agriculture can tell me why lettuce and tomato can't be substitutes. But for now, let's assume that they use the same materials to make them. Same amount of water, same soil, etc. If these are truly substitutes in production, then what happens with one impacts the other. So here we have the demand for lettuce and supply of lettuce, and the demand for tomatoes and the supply of tomatoes. Let's assume that there are less farmers producing tomatoes. So the supply of tomatoes in the market has decreased. Number of farmers have sold their land and turned them into neighborhoods. Okay, so supply of tomatoes has decreased, and if the supply of tomatoes goes down, shifts to the left, then that means at the current price for tomatoes, there is, well, here's the quantity supplied, here's the amount that businesses are selling versus the amount that customers want. So there's a shortage. So what does that do to the price of tomatoes? The price of tomatoes will go up. Here's our new price for tomatoes. Well, you as a farmer have this land and you can either produce lettuce or tomatoes. And as you see that there's now a higher price for tomatoes, then you're thinking, well, which one would I rather produce? The higher priced tomatoes or the lower priced lettuce? Well, I'd rather sell what? For higher priced tomatoes, right? So what's going to happen then in the lettuce market? So here's the price of lettuce. And you're thinking, you know what? I would much rather sell tomatoes because I can get a better price for them. That's more profitable, so I'm going to switch. So that means that at the current price for lettuce, the amount of lettuce we're willing to make and sell is less. Well, that point is not on the supply curve. What we've done is created a whole new supply curve. So there's been a decrease in the supply of lettuce. Okay. And that means at the current price for lettuce, customers want more than there is. And that's going to do what to the price of lettuce? It's going to make the price of lettuce go up. So when the price of tomatoes go up, if they're substitutes for the price of lettuce, lettuce will go up as well. So we can see how the lettuce market is impacted by the tomato market. And you're right, there's some jostling right between, so that would then go back and change the tomato market as well. And so we have some fluctuation in the supplies of both. We could also look at a change in the demand for tomatoes. Maybe the demand for tomatoes has increased because we are hearing how healthy they are. If the demand for tomatoes is increasing because we're now hearing how better they are for you, that's also going to drive up the price. And again, if you're in the lettuce market, you're thinking, I'd rather sell tomatoes. Supply of lettuce decreases, price of lettuce goes up. So when we have substitutes in production, when they use the same resources, then the price of one going up will cause the price of the other to go up. Well, what about complements in production? So let's create another blank page here. Just got to figure out where that page went. All right, so here's our blank page. All right, so we're looking at the price of complements in production. So again, the in production part is because this is in the mind of the business. And here we're looking at complements. And so we're looking at things that go well together. And what we mean is that as a business, when you decide to make a good, if the leftovers make something else, then they are complements. So for example, let's suppose that you are a rancher, right? So you raise cattle. So part of those cattle, when they get slaughtered, get turned into beef, and the other part of the cattle gets turned into hides, which becomes leather products. So here we have demand for beef and supply of beef. Here we have demand for leather, supply of leather. Okay. Now let's suppose that leather is really in style. Everybody wants to wear leather everything, which means there is an increase in demand for hides. Well, you can't just skin a cow and leave it running around, right? When you take the hide off a cow, then the rest of the cow needs to be used for something else. So when we have an increase in demand for leather, what's that going to do to the price of leather? Well, that increase in demand means that at the current price, customers want more than there is, which will drive up the price. So the price for leather will increase. As a rancher, well, I want to be a part of that. If it's a higher price for hides, I want to be producing hides. In which case, I am then going to need more cattle. Well, and if I have more cattle that I am taking the hides from, what does that do in the beef market? Well, at the current price of beef, if I'm slaughtering more cows to make hides, that means I now have a lot of extra beef to sell. And notice that point is not on the supply curve. So at the current price of beef, there's an increase in the quantity that we wish to sell. So we've actually shifted the supply curve to the right. And what that means now is there's tons of beef at the grocery store. So the quantity supplied is more than the quantity demanded, which drives down the price. So we had an increase. We can get that back. Where did it go? We seem to have lost our image here. That's substitutes. Where's our complements? Well, anyways, what happens is that the price of leather has gone up, the supply of beef increases, and that increase in supply, that surplus the grocery store, pushes down the price. So when we're looking at the price of substitutes and complements, if the price of a complement in production goes up, so hides go up, then the price of the other good is going to go down, because we're going to, when there's an increase in the complement, increase in the price of leather, we're producing more cows, and that's going to push down the price of beef. In comparison, if the price of a substitute, and these of course are in production, if the price of a substitute in production increases, then what happens is we're switching from one good to another. And so if we can make more with one good, we're going to not make the other. And that decrease in supply means that the price of the other good is going to go up. So notice they move in opposite directions for complements in production and the same direction for substitutes in production.